The blizzard hit 3 hours before sunset, turning the Montana Territory into a white hell that swallowed everything in its path. And Quinn Patterson knew if he didn't find shelter soon, both he and his horse would be frozen corpses by morning. The wind howled like a pack of wolves as Quinn squinted through the horizontal snow, searching desperately for any landmark he recognized. He'd been checking his trap lines when the storm rolled in from the north with terrifying speed, cutting visibility down to mere feet. His gelding, a sturdy buckskin named Copper, trudged forward with his head lowered against the brutal wind, ice already forming on his mane. Quinn pulled his scarf higher over his face, but the cold still bit through every layer he wore. His fingers were going numb inside his gloves, and he knew that was a dangerous sign. He'd seen what frostbite could do to a man, had watched Doc Henderson amputate 3 fingers off old Pete Morrison just last winter after the fool had passed out drunk in a snowdrift. Quinn had no intention of losing any parts of himself today. Through the white curtain of snow, he spotted something dark ahead, a shape that didn't belong to the natural landscape. His heart leaped with hope as he urged Copper forward, praying it was the old line shack he'd used a few times before. As they drew closer, Quinn could make out the rough outline of a wagon, partially overturned and half buried in snow. "Whoa there," he called to Copper, pulling the horse to a stop. The wagon looked like it had slid off the trail, one wheel busted clean off. It was a freight wagon by the look of it, though what anyone was doing out here with such a wagon in this weather was beyond his understanding. Quinn dismounted, his boots sinking deep into the snow. He tied Copper's reins to the wagon's exposed undercarriage and moved to investigate. The canvas covering the back was torn and flapping wildly in the wind, and boxes and crates lay scattered around the wreckage. But it was the footprints leading away from the wagon that made his blood run cold. Someone had survived the crash and had tried to walk away. In this storm, on foot, they wouldn't last an hour. He followed the rapidly filling tracks, leading Copper behind him. The prints were small, probably a woman's boots, and they were erratic, weaving back and forth like the person was already disoriented. Quinn's pace quickened despite the deep snow. Every minute counted now. He found her 50 yards from the wagon, collapsed face down in a snowdrift, her dark cloak spread around her like raven wings. Quinn's heart hammered as he dropped to his knees beside her, turning her over with gentle but urgent hands. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair plastered to her pale face. Her lips had a bluish tint that terrified him. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" He shook her gently, then harder. Her eyelids fluttered and a soft moan escaped her lips. She was alive, thank God, but she wouldn't be for long if he didn't get her warm. Quinn scooped her into his arms, grunting at the effort of standing in the deep snow while carrying her weight. She was lighter than he expected, and he wondered how long it had been since she'd eaten a proper meal. Her head lolled against his chest as he carried her back to Copper. He couldn't take her back to the wagon. It offered no real shelter with that torn canvas. The line shack was still his best hope, but he wasn't entirely sure of the direction anymore. The storm had disoriented him, and visibility was getting worse as the day faded toward evening. Quinn made a decision. He laid the woman across Copper's saddle, then climbed up behind her, pulling her back against his chest and wrapping his heavy coat around both of them as best he could. He gave Copper his head, trusting the horse's instincts to find shelter better than his own rapidly clouding judgment. The woman stirred against him, mumbling something he couldn't make out over the wind. Her body was shaking violently, which Quinn knew was actually a good sign. It meant her body was still trying to warm itself. When the shaking stopped, that's when death was close. "Stay with me," he said against her ear, tightening his arms around her. We're going to get through this. I promise you we're going to make it. Copper plodded forward with determined steps, and Quinn sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the sturdy animal. The horse had gotten him out of tight spots before, and Quinn trusted him completely. The minutes stretched into an eternity of white and cold and wind. Quinn's face was so numb he could barely feel it anymore, and his hands were locked in place around the woman. He couldn't have let go if he tried. Just when Quinn was beginning to think they'd all freeze together, Copper stopped and whinnied. Quinn blinked snow from his eyelashes and saw the dark outline of a structure ahead. The line shack. They'd found it. Relief flooded through him as he half slid, half fell from Copper's back, pulling the woman with him. He carried her to the door and kicked it open, grateful he'd never bothered with a lock on the place. The interior was dark and bitterly cold, but it was shelter from the wind, and that made all the difference. Quinn laid the woman on the floor and fumbled in his saddlebags for matches, his frozen fingers barely cooperating. There was a small stack of wood by the fireplace, dry and ready, because Quinn always made sure to leave the place stocked for emergencies just like this one. It took 3 tries to strike a match, but finally a small flame flickered to life. He got a fire going in the stone fireplace, then turned his attention back to the woman. She was still shaking, curled into a ball on the rough wooden floor. Quinn knew what he had to do next, and he dreaded it, but there was no choice. Wet clothes would kill her as surely as the cold. He had to get her warm and dry. "Madam, I need to help you out of these wet things," he said, even though she probably couldn't hear him. "I'm not trying to be improper, but you'll die if I don't." He worked as quickly as his numb fingers would allow, removing her soaked cloak, her traveling dress, the layers of petticoats beneath. He tried to be respectful, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible, but he couldn't help noticing how thin she was, her ribs visible beneath her chemise. He left her undergarments on and wrapped her in both of his spare blankets from his bedroll, then added his own coat on top for good measure. Quinn hung her wet clothes near the fire to dry, then saw to Copper, bringing the horse into the shack with them. It was cramped, but the animal's body heat would help warm the small space. He rubbed Copper down thoroughly, checking for any signs of frostbite on the horse's legs, then gave him some grain from the supplies stored in the shack. Only then did Quinn tend to his own needs, peeling off his wet outer clothes and hanging them to dry. His hands were starting to burn as feeling returned to them, which was painful but necessary. He pulled on a dry shirt from his saddlebags and wrapped himself in his oilskin coat, which had stayed mostly dry. The fire was roaring now, filling the small shack with blessed warmth. Quinn knelt beside the woman and checked her pulse at her neck. It was there, steady but weak. Her skin was still cold as ice. He knew what had to be done, even though it made his ears burn with embarrassment. Body heat was the fastest way to warm someone suffering from the cold. Quinn hesitated, his mother's voice echoing in his head about proper behavior around ladies, but then the woman's lips trembled and another violent shiver racked her frame. His decision was made. Quinn arranged the blankets so they could cover both of them, then carefully positioned himself behind the woman, pulling her back against his chest and wrapping his arms around her. He tucked the blankets tight around them both, creating a cocoon of warmth. Through the layers between them, he could feel how cold she still was, her body seeming to suck the heat from his own. "Come on," he murmured against her dark hair. "Fight, stay with me." The wind howled outside, battering the walls of the shack, but inside the fire crackled cheerfully, slowly warming the space. Quinn held the woman close, willing his body heat into hers, and tried not to think about how this would look if anyone stumbled upon them. He was a 26-year-old bachelor with a reputation for honest dealing and hard work. She appeared to be a proper young lady, though what she'd been doing in that freight wagon he couldn't fathom. The situation was thoroughly compromising, but Quinn couldn't bring himself to care. Keeping her alive was all that mattered. As the minutes passed and the shack grew warmer, the woman's shaking gradually subsided. Her skin began to lose that terrifying bluish tint, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Quinn felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. She was going to make it. He must have dozed off, exhausted from the ordeal, because he jerked awake to find the shack much warmer and the woman stirring in his arms. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and pale light was filtering through the gaps in the shuttered window. Dawn. They'd made it through the night. The woman tensed, suddenly aware she was being held. Quinn quickly loosened his arms, giving her space. "Easy now," he said softly. "You're safe. I found you collapsed in the snow." She rolled over to face him, and Quinn found himself looking into the most striking pair of green eyes he'd ever seen. Even exhausted and disheveled, she was beautiful. Her dark hair had dried in waves around her face, and her lips, now a healthy pink instead of blue, parted in surprise. "Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Quinn Patterson. I've got a ranch about 15 miles from here. Well, it's not much of a ranch yet, more of a homestead claim, but I'm working on it." He was rambling, he realized, and shut his mouth with an audible click of teeth. "Where am I?" "A line shack in the Montana Territory, about 40 miles northeast of Helena. There was a blizzard yesterday. I found you collapsed near your wrecked wagon." Her eyes widened, and she tried to sit up too quickly, swaying with dizziness. Quinn steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. "The wagon. Oh no, all the mail. Mr. Henderson is going to be furious." "You were hauling mail." "I was riding with Mr. Henderson. He's the mail carrier. He hired me in Helena to help with the delivery route because his regular partner broke his leg." She looked around frantically. "Where is Mr. Henderson? Was he at the wagon?" Quinn felt his stomach sink. "There was no one else at the wagon when I found it, just you. The driver's bench was empty." Her hand flew to her mouth. "We hit something, I think. A rock or a hidden log under the snow. The wagon went over and I hit my head. When I woke up, Mr. Henderson was gone. I called for him, but there was no answer. I thought maybe he went for help, so I tried to follow what I thought were his tracks, but the snow was so heavy and I couldn't see, and then I just couldn't walk anymore." "I'll look for him when the storm clears," Quinn promised, though he held little hope. If Henderson had wandered off in that blizzard, especially if he'd been injured in the crash, his chances were slim. "You said your name was Quinn Patterson?" "Yes, madam. I'm Josephine Zimmerman. Most people call me Josie." She looked down and seemed to suddenly realize she was in her undergarments, wrapped in blankets. Her cheeks flushed scarlet. "Did you? My clothes. They were soaked through. You would have died from the cold. I hung them by the fire to dry. I tried to be respectful about it, madam." "I swear I'm not that kind of man." To his surprise, she didn't look angry or frightened. "You saved my life. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Quinn is fine. Then you should call me Josie." She pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "I don't suppose there's anything to eat." "I can't remember when I last had a meal." Quinn smiled. "I've got some jerky and hardtack in my saddlebags, and there's coffee and beans here in the shack. It's not fancy, but it'll fill your belly." He got up and busied himself with making coffee and warming the beans, grateful for something to do with his hands. Copper nickered softly from his corner, and Quinn gave the horse an affectionate pat. "That's Copper. He's the real hero. Found this place in the middle of a blizzard." Josie's dress and petticoats were dry now, so Quinn handed them to her, then politely turned his back while she dressed. He heard the rustle of fabric and tried very hard not to think about what was happening behind him. "You can turn around now." Quinn did, and found Josie looking much more composed, though her hair was still loose around her shoulders. He handed her a tin cup of strong black coffee and a plate of beans. She accepted them gratefully and ate with single-minded focus that spoke of real hunger. "So what's a young lady like you doing working as a mail carrier's assistant?" Quinn asked, settling down across the fire from her with his own plate. Josie's expression became guarded. "I needed the work. Mr. Henderson offered decent pay for a week's work, and I needed the money to get to Bannack." "What's in Bannack?" She was quiet for a long moment, and Quinn thought she might not answer. Then she sighed. "A man named Roger Thornton. We've been corresponding for 6 months. He sent for me to come be his wife. I'm a mail-order bride." She said the last part with a mixture of defiance and embarrassment. Quinn felt something twist in his chest that he didn't want to examine too closely. Of course she was spoken for. A woman like her wouldn't be alone unless she was traveling to meet someone. "Well, Bannack's a good ways from here, about 80 miles southwest, I'd reckon." "I know. Mr. Henderson was taking a northern route to make several deliveries before looping back down to Bannack. I was supposed to arrive next week." She looked at Quinn with worry in her green eyes. "How long do you think we'll be stuck here?" Quinn moved to the window and opened the shutter a crack. Snow was still falling, though not as heavily as yesterday. "Storm looks like it's passing. We should be able to head out tomorrow, maybe today if it clears up by afternoon. And Mr. Henderson, I'll search for him. But Josie, you need to prepare yourself. A man alone in that storm, possibly injured. The chances aren't good." Her eyes filled with tears. "He was kind to me. Told me about his grandchildren, showed me pictures he carried. He didn't deserve to die in the snow." "No, he didn't." They spent the rest of the morning in the shack, waiting for the storm to fully pass. Quinn found himself watching Josie when he thought she wasn't looking. She had a way of tucking her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, and her laugh when he managed to coax one from her was like music. He learned she was from Boston originally, that she'd come west after her parents died of fever, hoping for a fresh start. She'd worked as a seamstress in Helena for 8 months, barely scraping by when she'd answered Roger Thornton's advertisement for a bride. "He seemed nice in his letters," she said, staring into the fire. "He has a ranch in Bannack. He's 42, never been married. He said he wanted a wife who could read and write, someone intelligent who wouldn't mind the isolation of ranch life." Quinn wanted to ask if she loved this Roger Thornton, but he bit his tongue. It wasn't his business, and besides, love wasn't always part of these arrangements. Often it was simple economics, a trade of companionship and household skills for security and protection. By early afternoon, the snow had stopped completely, and pale sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Quinn saddled up Copper and helped Josie climb up behind him. They rode back to the wrecked wagon, where Quinn searched the area thoroughly for any sign of Henderson. He found the man half a mile from the wagon, partially buried in snow, his body frozen solid. He'd clearly been disoriented from the crash and had wandered in the wrong direction. Josie cried when Quinn told her, and he wished he could spare her the grief. They couldn't bury Henderson. The ground was frozen solid, but Quinn marked the location carefully so he could report it to the authorities in Helena, and Henderson's family could retrieve the body come spring. The mail sacks were scattered around the wagon, but most seemed intact. Quinn loaded what he could onto Copper, though it made for a heavy burden. The wagon itself would have to stay until someone could come with the equipment to right it and replace the wheel. "We'll head to my place," Quinn said as they started out. "It's the closest shelter. Then I can take you into Helena and you can get passage to Bannack from there." I don't have any money for passage, Josie admitted. I spent my last dollars on warm clothes for the trip. Mr. Henderson was going to pay me when we reached Bannack. Don't worry about that now. We'll figure something out. The ride to Quinn's homestead took the rest of the day. Josie sat behind him on copper, her arms wrapped around his waist, and Quinn was acutely aware of her presence. They talked to pass the time, and Quinn found himself telling her things he rarely shared with anyone, about his dreams for his ranch, about losing his father to a mining accident when he was 16, about how he'd saved every penny for years to afford his land claim. "It's not much yet," he warned as his cabin came into view in the fading light. "Just a 2-room cabin and a small barn. I've got 20 head of cattle and big plans, but plans don't keep you warm at night." "It looks wonderful," Josie said, and she sounded sincere. The cabin was cold when they entered, the fire having gone out while Quinn was away, but he soon had it roaring again. His home was sparse but clean, one room serving as kitchen and living area, the other a small bedroom. He'd built everything himself, from the rough-hewn furniture to the stone fireplace. "You take the bed," Quinn said. "I'll sleep out here by the fire." "Quinn, I can't take your bed." "Yes, you can. You've been through an ordeal. I won't hear any arguments." She looked like she wanted to protest further, but exhaustion won out. She nodded and disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Quinn settled down by the fire, wrapping himself in a blanket, but sleep eluded him. He kept thinking about Josie in the next room, about how right it had felt to hold her in the lined shack, about how much he was going to hate putting her on a stage to Bannack. He barely knew her, he reminded himself. She was spoken for, promised to another man. It didn't matter that Quinn felt more alive in the day since he'd met her than he had in the entire year before. It didn't matter that when she smiled at him, his heart did strange acrobatics in his chest. She wasn't his to keep. The next morning, Quinn woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. He sat up, disoriented, and found Josie bustling around his small kitchen. "I hope you don't mind," she said, flashing him a smile. "I found the bacon and eggs in your larder. I wanted to make breakfast to thank you for everything." "I don't mind at all." Quinn got up, running a hand through his disheveled hair, suddenly aware he probably looked a mess. They ate breakfast together, and Quinn was struck by how natural it felt, having her there in his home, like she belonged. He shoved the thought away. "I've been thinking," Josie said, setting down her coffee cup, "about Mr. Henderson's family. They should know what happened to him, and the mail should be delivered. I'll report it to the authorities in Helena. They'll handle notifying his family. And I'll write to Mr. Thornton, explain why I'm delayed." The mention of Roger Thornton's name was like a splash of cold water. Right. She was going to Bannack to marry another man. "I could take you to Helena today," Quinn offered. "Get you on a stage." But even as he said it, Quinn found himself hoping she'd refuse. Just a little more time, he thought. Just a few more days with her. "Actually," Josie said slowly, "I was hoping I could stay here for a while, just until I earn enough money to pay for my passage to Bannack. I could cook and clean for you, help around the homestead. You said you have big plans for the ranch. Maybe I could help you with those." Quinn's heart leaped. "You want to stay here, with me? If you'll have me, I promise I'll stay out of your way, and it would all be perfectly proper. I'd earn my keep, and then I'd go to Bannack like I'm supposed to." Every sensible part of Quinn's brain screamed that this was a terrible idea. Spending more time with Josie would only make things harder, but he found himself nodding anyway. "All right. You can stay. But I won't work you like a servant. You're a guest, and you'll be treated like one. I insist on helping. I'm not one to sit idle." So Josie stayed, and the days that followed were the best Quinn had known. She was true to her word about helping. cooking meals that were actual cuisine rather than the basic bachelor fare Quinn was used to, mending his clothes, organizing his chaotic cabin into something resembling a real home. But it was more than that. She talked to him while he worked, really talked, sharing her thoughts and opinions on everything from politics to literature. She made him laugh with stories from her time in Boston. She sat with him in the evenings while he whittled, the firelight catching in her dark hair, and Quinn felt a peace he'd never known before. The problem was, the more time Quinn spent with Josie, the more he fell in love with her. He tried to fight it, reminded himself constantly that she was promised to another man, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with his bare hands. She'd captured his heart completely, and Quinn didn't know what to do about it. 2 weeks after he'd found her in the snow, Quinn was mending fence line when Josie brought him lunch. The weather had warmed considerably, the snow melting into muddy patches, early spring asserting itself. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, handing him a wrapped bundle of bread and cheese. "Thank you." Quinn accepted it gratefully, very aware of how close she was standing. "Quinn, can I ask you something? Anything? Why haven't you married? A man like you with your own land, your own home. You're handsome and kind. I can't imagine women aren't interested." Quinn felt heat creep up his neck. "Never found the right woman, I guess. Been too busy trying to build something worth having. I always figured when the time was right, I'd know." He looked at her meaningfully. "I'd feel it." Josie's cheeks flushed pink and she looked away. "I should get back to the house. I'm making stew for dinner." She hurried off and Quinn watched her go, his heart heavy. He was running out of time. She'd saved almost enough money now for her passage to Bannack. Soon she'd leave and he'd probably never see her again. That evening after dinner, they sat by the fire as usual. Quinn was carving a small wooden bird, a gift he'd been working on for Josie, though he wasn't sure if he'd have the courage to give it to her. The silence between them was comfortable, but charged with something unspoken. "I wrote to Roger again today," Josie said suddenly. "Told him I'd saved enough money and would be leaving in a few days." Quinn's hand slipped, and the knife nicked his thumb. He cursed softly and stuck the bleeding digit in his mouth. "Are you all right?" Josie was beside him instantly, taking his hand and examining the cut. "It's not deep. Let me bandage it." She fetched clean cloth and wrapped his thumb with gentle efficiency, but she didn't let go of his hand when she was done. They sat there, Josie holding Quinn's hand, both of them staring at their intertwined fingers. "Josie," Quinn said hoarsely, "I need to tell you something." "Don't." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Please don't." "I have to. I can't let you leave without saying it. I love you. I've loved you since the moment I saw you in that snowdrift. I know you're promised to another man, and I know I have no right, but I can't let you go without telling you how I feel." Josie's eyes filled with tears. "Quinn, I can't. I gave my word to Roger. He's expecting me. He's planned his life around my arrival. But do you love him? I've never even met him." "Then don't go. Stay here. Marry me instead." Josie pulled her hand away, standing up abruptly. "You don't understand. I gave my word. I promised. Breaking that promise would make me a liar and a cheat." "What kind of person would I be?" "You'd be a person who chose her own happiness," Quinn said, rising to face her. "You'd be a woman who had the courage to change her mind when she realized she was making a mistake. You think marrying Roger is a mistake. I think marrying him when you could marry me is a mistake. Josie, I can see it in your eyes. You feel this thing between us two. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you don't feel anything for me, and I'll take you to Helena tomorrow and never say another word about it." Josie opened her mouth, then closed it again. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "It doesn't matter what I feel. I made a commitment." "You made a commitment to a stranger based on letters. You don't owe him your whole life. He's been kind to me. He sent me money for travel. He's expecting me." Then I'll go to Bannack with you, Quinn said desperately. I'll meet this Roger Thornton and explain. I'll make him understand. I'll do whatever it takes, Josie, because losing you would break something in me I don't think I could ever fix. She was crying openly now, and Quinn pulled her into his arms. She didn't resist, burying her face in his chest while her shoulders shook with sobs. I'm scared, she whispered against his shirt. What if I stay and you change your mind about me? What if this feeling goes away and I've destroyed my one chance at security? Quinn tilted her face up to his. Look at me. Really look at me. Do you honestly think I could ever change my mind about you? Josie, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. You make me want to be better, to build something bigger, to create a life worth living. I love you. Not just today, but tomorrow and every day after that. I love you too, she breathed, and Quinn's heart soared. I think I've loved you since you wrapped me in blankets and held me through that terrible night. You saved my life, Quinn, in more ways than one. So stay, please stay. I can't just disappear on Roger. It wouldn't be right. Then we'll go to Bannack together. We'll explain in person. It's the honorable thing to do. Josie nodded slowly. Together. We'll do it together. Quinn couldn't help himself anymore. He leaned down and kissed her, pouring all his love and hope and fear into that kiss. Josie kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for a moment the world fell away and there was nothing but the two of them in this perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. We'll leave tomorrow. Get this settled once and for all. Then we can start our life together. Tomorrow, Josie agreed. They held each other by the firelight, and Quinn sent up a silent prayer of thanks for blizzards and wrecked wagons and frozen mail-order brides. The journey to Bannack took 3 days. Quinn brought Josie on copper while leading his pack mule loaded with supplies. They could have made better time with a wagon, but Quinn didn't own one, and the roads were still treacherous with spring mud anyway. They traveled slowly, carefully, camping at night under the stars. On the second night, as they lay by their campfire with Josie curled against Quinn's side, she told him more about her correspondence with Roger Thornton. His letters were always kind, she said, tracing patterns on Quinn's chest. But they were formal too. He talked about practical matters, about what he expected from a wife, about how the ranch operated. He never once asked me about my dreams or what I wanted from life. It was more like a business arrangement than a courtship. And what do you want from life? Quinn asked, playing with a strand of her dark hair. I want to matter to someone. I want a partner, not an employer. I want children someday, and I want them to grow up seeing their parents in love, really in love, so they know what to look for when they're grown. I want to build something lasting. I want all those things too. We'll build it together, Josie. I promise you that. She tilted her face up to kiss him, and Quinn marveled at how perfectly she fit in his arms, like she was made for him. They reached Bannack on the 3rd day, riding into town in the late afternoon. Bannack was bigger than Quinn's nearest town, a bustling mining community that had seen better days but still held onto hope. They found Roger Thornton's ranch without much difficulty, a spread about 2 miles outside town. It was an impressive operation, Quinn had to admit. Large barn, sturdy house, corrals with good fencing. Roger Thornton had clearly put years of work into the place. Quinn felt a stab of inadequacy. His own homestead was rough and half-finished compared to this. Could he really blame Josie if she chose security over love? But then Josie squeezed his hand, and Quinn saw the determination in her eyes. She'd made her choice, and it was him. That knowledge gave him the courage to dismount and help her down from copper. They walked to the front door together, and Quinn knocked firmly. Footsteps sounded inside, and then the door opened to reveal a tall, gray-haired man in his 40s with a weathered face and suspicious eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Are you Roger Thornton?" Josie asked. "I am." "I'm Josephine Zimmerman. We've been corresponding. I was supposed to arrive last week to become your wife." Recognition flickered across Roger's face, followed by a flash of anger. "You're 2 weeks late. I'd assumed you'd changed your mind or met with some accident." "There was an accident," Josie said. "The mail wagon I was traveling with crashed in a blizzard. The driver died. I would have died too if Quinn here hadn't found me and saved my life." Roger's eyes moved to Quinn, assessing him with clear displeasure. "I see. Well, you're here now. We can have the ceremony tomorrow." "There's a preacher in town. Mr. Thornton, I'm not here to marry you. I came to explain in person and apologize. I've fallen in love with Quinn and I'm going to marry him instead." The words hung in the air. Roger's face darkened, his jaw clenching. "You came all this way to tell me you're breaking our agreement. It wasn't right to just disappear or send a letter. You deserve to hear it from me directly." "How noble," Roger said coldly. "I suppose it doesn't matter that I've been preparing for your arrival. That I built an addition onto my house specifically for you. That I've told everyone in town I was finally getting married." "I'm sorry," Josie said, and Quinn could hear the genuine regret in her voice. "Truly I am, but I can't marry you when I'm in love with someone else. It wouldn't be fair to either of us." "Fair?" Roger laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about fair? I sent you money. I waited months. And you show up with another man and tell me it's not fair." Quinn stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Josie. "I understand you're angry and you have every right to be. But Josie is trying to do the honorable thing here. She could have just never shown up. Instead, she traveled for days to tell you the truth in person." "The honorable thing would have been keeping her word," Roger shot back. "But I suppose honor doesn't mean much anymore. Fine, you want him instead of me, take him. But don't expect any help or goodwill from this quarter. You made your choice. Now live with it." He slammed the door in their faces. Josie flinched and Quinn put his arm around her. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "You told him the truth. That took courage. He's right though, isn't he? I did break my word. I'm not the person I thought I was. No, you're better. You're someone who has the strength to choose love over convenience." Don't let his anger make you doubt that. They rode back into Bannack proper and got a room at the hotel. It was a single room, which raised the clerk's eyebrows, but Quinn simply stated they were engaged and would be married shortly. It wasn't entirely proper, but they'd come too far to worry about propriety now. That evening, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, Josie was quiet. Quinn sat beside her, taking her hand, having second thoughts. "No, never. I just hate that I hurt him, and I keep thinking about what he said. About honor and keeping your word. Josie, look at me." Quinn waited until her green eyes met his. "Keeping a promise that would make you miserable for the rest of your life isn't honor. It's martyrdom. You don't owe Roger Thornton your whole life just because you answered his advertisement. You tried to do right by him by telling him the truth. That's all anyone can ask. When did you get so wise?" "When I fell in love with a frozen mail-order bride who said wrong address." Quinn smiled. "And I said right destination." Josie laughed through her tears. "You did, didn't you? Right destination, I like that. So marry me, tomorrow. We'll find that preacher Roger mentioned and make this official. Then we'll go home and start our life together." "Home," Josie repeated, and the word sounded like a prayer on her lips. "Yes, let's go home." They were married the next morning in a small church on the edge of Bannack. The preacher was an elderly man named Reverend Walsh who asked no questions and required no explanations, simply performed the ceremony with quiet dignity. Quinn wore his best shirt, which wasn't saying much, and Josie wore the dress she'd been wearing when he found her, cleaned and mended. They had no rings, no family present, no grand celebration, But when the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Quinn kissed his bride, none of that mattered. Josie was his and he was hers, and the rest of the world could go hang. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, and Quinn did his best to be gentle and patient with Josie, knowing this was all new to her. She was nervous at first, trembling like a frightened bird, but Quinn took his time, whispered words of love against her skin, showed her with his hands and mouth how precious she was to him. By the time the moon was high in the sky, Josie was sleeping peacefully in his arms, and Quinn had never felt more content in his entire life. The journey back to Quinn's homestead was filled with plans and dreams. Josie wanted to plant a garden come summer, maybe get some chickens. Quinn talked about expanding his herd, building a proper barn. They'd need a bigger house eventually, especially if children came along. The thought of Josie round with his child made Quinn's heart swell with joy. When they finally crested the last hill and his cabin came into view, Quinn felt a surge of pride. It wasn't much compared to Roger Thornton's spread, but it was theirs. They'd build it up together, make it into something special. "Welcome home, Mrs. Patterson," Quinn said as he helped Josie down from Copper. "Mrs. Patterson," Josie repeated, testing the name. "I like the sound of that." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Josie threw herself into improving the homestead, and Quinn found himself working harder than ever before, motivated by the knowledge that he was building something for both of them now. The garden Josie planted flourished, providing fresh vegetables. She traded eggs from their new chickens with neighbors for fabric and other supplies. Slowly but surely, the homestead transformed from a bachelor's rough camp into a real home. Spring melted into summer, and summer into fall. Quinn's cattle herd grew, and he was able to sell several head for good profit. He used the money to buy lumber for the addition he was building onto the cabin, 2 more rooms that would give them proper space to grow. It was October when Josie came to him with news that made his heart stop. She was with child. Their baby would arrive sometime in early spring. Quinn was terrified and elated in equal measure. A baby. His child. Their child. He became almost obsessively protective of Josie, insisting she rest more, not lift anything heavy. She laughed at his fussing but seemed secretly pleased by his concern. The winter that year was mild compared to the blizzard that had brought them together. Quinn made sure they were well stocked with firewood and provisions, determined that his pregnant wife would want for nothing. Josie spent the cold months sewing baby clothes and blankets, humming softly to herself while Quinn worked on a cradle he was building from pine wood. "What if I'm terrible at being a mother?" Josie asked one night as they lay in bed, her hand on her swelling belly. "You won't be. You're going to be amazing." Quinn pressed his hand over hers, feeling the firm swell of their child beneath. "This baby is already so loved. That's what matters most." Their son was born on a warm April morning, screaming his displeasure at the world with impressive lungs. Quinn had ridden through the night to fetch the midwife from town, and he'd paced outside while Josie labored, feeling utterly useless. But when the midwife finally called him in and he saw Josie holding their tiny son, tears streaming down her exhausted face, Quinn felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. "He's perfect," Josie whispered. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Quinn asked, gently touching his son's tiny fist. The baby's fingers wrapped around Quinn's thumb with surprising strength. "What about Matthew? It means gift from God. Matthew Patterson, I like it." Quinn kissed Josie's forehead. "Thank you for him, for everything." "Thank you for saving me from that snowdrift," Josie replied with a tired smile. "Best wrong address I ever had. Best right destination I ever found." Matthew grew quickly, a healthy, happy baby who looked like his mother with Quinn's eyes. The homestead continued to thrive. Quinn's cattle operation expanded enough that he hired a young hand to help with the work. The addition was completed, giving them a proper parlor and a second bedroom for when more children came along, and they did come. 2 years after Matthew, Josie gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Emma. Quinn was completely outnumbered by females in his household, and he couldn't have been happier. The twins had Josie's green eyes and dark hair, and they had their father wrapped around their little fingers from the moment they drew breath. 5 years after that, another son arrived, Thomas, who proved to be quiet and thoughtful where his older brother was boisterous and bold. The cabin that had once been a lonely bachelor's dwelling was now filled with laughter and noise and the wonderful chaos of children. On their 10th anniversary, Quinn and Josie sat on the porch of their home, now a proper ranch house with a second story and a wide veranda. The children were finally asleep inside after much fussing and storytelling. The sun was setting, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and pink. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd married Roger Thornton?" Josie asked, leaning against Quinn's shoulder. "Sometimes. But then I remember that everything happens for a reason. That blizzard, the wagon crash, even poor Mr. Henderson's death. It all led you to me." "Wrong address," Josie murmured. "Right destination," Quinn replied, kissing the top of her head. "Do you have any regrets?" "Not a single one." Only that I didn't fall in that snowdrift sooner." Josie lifted her face to kiss him. "I love you, Quinn Patterson. Thank you for being stubborn enough to not let me go." "I love you too, Josie, forever and always." From inside the house came a wail, one of the twins waking. Then Matthew's voice trying to calm his sister. Then Thomas joined in, his young voice plaintive. Quinn and Josie looked at each other and laughed. "Parenthood," Josie said, standing up. "Never a dull moment. I wouldn't have it any other way." They went inside together, hand in hand, to tend to their children. The ranch Quinn had built, the life they'd created together, it was everything he'd ever dreamed of and more. All because of a blizzard, a freezing mail-order bride, and the courage they'd both found to choose love over obligation. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Matthew grew into a strong young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. The twins, Sarah and Emma, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into twice the mischief as a single child. Young Thomas proved to have a gift with animals, especially horses, and Quinn began teaching him the art of breaking and training them. The Patterson Ranch became known throughout the Montana Territory as a place of honest dealing and quality livestock. Quinn's reputation as a fair man spread, and he often found himself settling disputes between neighbors or offering advice to younger homesteaders just starting out. Josie became known for her kindness, never turning away anyone in need of a meal or a place to sleep. One spring day, nearly 15 years after their marriage, a wagon pulled up to the ranch house. Quinn was working with Thomas in the corral when he heard Josie's surprised exclamation from the house. He handed the lead rope to his son and walked over to investigate. An older man was climbing down from the wagon, moving stiffly like his joints pained him. He was gray-haired and weathered, and it took Quinn a moment to recognize Roger Thornton. Quinn's hand instinctively moved to his side, though he wasn't wearing his gun. He positioned himself between Thornton and Josie, old protective instincts flaring to life. "Roger," Josie said quietly, "this is unexpected." "Mrs. Patterson," Roger said formally. He looked at Quinn. "Patterson, I'm not here to cause trouble. I came to apologize." That was the last thing Quinn had expected. "Apologize, may I?" Roger gestured to the porch chairs. Josie looked at Quinn, who nodded slowly. They all sat, an awkward silence stretching between them. "I was angry for a long time after you left," Roger began, addressing Josie. "Felt like a fool. All my neighbors had seen me preparing for a bride who never came. The gossip was unpleasant." "I'm sorry about that," Josie said softly. "Let me finish." Roger held up a hand. "I was angry, but I was also wrong. I've spent these years alone on my ranch, and I've had a lot of time to think. The truth is, you did the right thing. A marriage without love would have been miserable for both of us. I was looking for someone to cook and clean and give me sons to leave the ranch to. I wasn't looking for a partner or a companion. You deserved better than that. What changed your mind?" Quinn asked. "I met a woman. Her name is Grace. She's a widow with 2 grown children. We've been courting for 6 months now, and I'm planning to ask her to marry me." Roger smiled, the first genuine expression Quinn had seen on his face. "When I'm with Grace, I understand what you two must have felt. The difference between an arrangement and actual love. I wanted to come here and tell you I was sorry for the harsh words I spoke. You were braver than I was, Mrs. Patterson. You chose love. That took courage." Josie's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for saying that. I've carried guilt all these years." "Don't. You did right. And Patterson, you've done well by her. I heard in town about your ranch, your children. You built something good here." Quinn extended his hand and Roger shook it firmly. "No hard feelings. No hard feelings." Roger stayed for dinner, meeting all the children and admiring the ranch. He and Grace were married a month later, and to everyone's surprise, the 2 couples became friends, visiting each other several times a year. Grace was a warm, practical woman who adored Roger, and it was clear the feeling was mutual. Sometimes Quinn wondered if Roger's first anger at losing Josie had actually been a blessing in disguise, freeing him to eventually find the right woman. Time continued its relentless march. Matthew, at 21, announced he was courting a girl from town, a sweet-natured young woman named Alice who made him grin like a fool. Quinn and Josie gave their blessing, and the wedding was set for the following spring. The twins, at 19, were as different as 2 people could be despite their identical appearance. Sarah had inherited her mother's love of books and learning and talked about becoming a teacher. Emma was adventurous, more interested in helping with the ranch work than anything domestic. Thomas, at 14, was already as tall as Quinn and showed every sign of becoming a fine rancher himself. On a cool evening in late autumn, Quinn and Josie took a rare moment alone, riding out to a hilltop overlooking their property. They'd done this occasionally over the years, stealing time away from the children to just be Quinn and Josie again, not just parents or ranchers. "Our first baby is getting married," Josie said, leaning back against Quinn as they sat on a blanket watching the sunset. "When did we get so old?" "Speak for yourself, woman. I'm in my prime." Quinn grinned when Josie elbowed him gently. "But I know what you mean. Seems like just yesterday I was pulling you out of that snowdrift." 20 years this December," Josie murmured. 20 years since you saved my life. Best thing I ever did." "You know what I think about sometimes." Josie turned to face him. "What if the wagon hadn't crashed? What if there had been no blizzard? I would have made it to Bannack, married Roger out of obligation, and never known you existed. We would have lived our whole lives never knowing what we missed. But that didn't happen. The wagon did crash, there was a blizzard, and I found you. Some things are meant to be, Josie. We were meant to be. I believe that. I really do. Sometimes I feel like every step I took, every decision I made was leading me to you. Leaving Boston, coming west, answering Roger's advertisement, even taking that job with Mr. Henderson. It all brought me to that frozen moment when you picked me up out of the snow." "Wrong address," Quinn said softly. "Right destination," Josie replied, completing their private saying. They made love there on the hilltop as the stars came out, with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never faded between them. Afterward, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill, they talked about their children's futures, about the grandchildren they hoped to meet someday, about growing old together on the land they'd built together. "I want to be buried here," Josie said suddenly. "On this hill. With you beside me when the time comes. I want to look out over everything we created for eternity." "That's a long way off," Quinn said, though the thought of death, of ever being without Josie, made his chest tighten with fear. "I know. But when it does come, that's what I want. Promise me." "I promise." Matthew's wedding was a grand affair, with half the territory in attendance. The Patterson ranch had become prosperous over the years, and the family had many friends. Quinn walked his son through the ranch the day before the ceremony, showing him the property boundaries, discussing future plans. "This will all be yours someday," Quinn said. "Yours and your siblings. Everything your mother and I built. I know, Pa, and I'll take care of it, make you proud." "You already make me proud, son. You're a good man. You'll be a good husband to Alice and a good father when children come. That's what matters most. Not the land or the cattle, but the people you love and who love you back. You and Ma, you've shown us what real love looks like. I want what you have with Alice, that partnership, that friendship, the way you still look at Ma like she hung the moon." "Your mother is the best thing that ever happened to me," Quinn said simply. "Everything else, all of this, it's just bonus." The wedding was beautiful. Alice looked radiant in a white dress Josie had helped her sew, and Matthew couldn't stop smiling. As Quinn watched his son pledge his life to this young woman, he caught Josie's eye across the gathering. She was crying happy tears, and Quinn felt his own eyes sting. They'd done this. They'd raised this fine young man who knew the value of love and commitment. They'd built not just a ranch, but a legacy of family and faith and hard work. All because a blizzard had blown a freezing mail-order bride into Quinn's path 20 years ago. The years that followed brought grandchildren, just as they'd hoped. Matthew and Alice had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. The twins both eventually married, Sarah to a schoolteacher she met in town, Emma to a fellow rancher's son after years of insisting she'd never settle down. Thomas married at 22, bringing home a quiet, kind woman named Ruth who fit into the family like she'd always been there. The Patterson ranch had to be divided to accommodate all the married children who wanted to work the land. Quinn oversaw the process carefully, making sure everyone got fair shares, that no one felt slighted. The original homestead, the cabin where it all began, was preserved as a kind of monument, a reminder of where the family started. Quinn and Josie moved into a smaller house on the property, leaving the main ranch house to Matthew and his growing family. It was strange at first, after decades of being at the center of everything, but Quinn found he didn't mind the quiet. He and Josie had raised their children, built their empire. Now they could simply enjoy watching it flourish. On their 40th anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration. 3 generations of Pattersons filled the main house and spilled out onto the grounds. There was fiddle music and dancing, endless food and laughter that echoed across the Montana hills. Quinn stood on the porch of the main house, watching his children and grandchildren celebrate, and felt Josie slip her hand into his. "Look what we made," she whispered. "Look at all of this." Quinn couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. 14 grandchildren running around, his 4 children healthy and happy, all of it stemming from one moment of rescue in a blizzard 40 years ago. "Speech." Someone called out, and the call was taken up by others. "Speech." Quinn held up his hands, waiting for the noise to die down. "I'm not much for speeches. he began, his voice carrying across the yard. "But I'll say this. 40 years ago, I found a freezing woman in a snowdrift. She was supposed to be going somewhere else, to marry someone else. Wrong address, we used to say. Right destination," several people called out, familiar with the family story. "Right destination," Quinn agreed, squeezing Josie's hand. "Everything good in my life came from that day. This ranch, these buildings, all of you. You're all here because a blizzard blew through Montana at exactly the right time, because a wagon crashed at exactly the right place, because I happened to be checking my trap lines that particular day. Some people would call that coincidence. I call it destiny." He turned to Josie, looking into eyes that were still as green and vibrant as they'd been 4 decades ago, even if the face around them had gained lines and her hair had gone silver. "Josie Patterson, you are the love of my life. My partner, my best friend, the mother of my children and grandmother of my grandchildren. You are everything. Thank you for saying yes to me all those years ago, for choosing love over obligation, for building this life with me." "Thank you for finding me," Josie replied, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I was too scared to choose my own happiness. Thank you for 40 years of love." They kissed while their family cheered and whistled, and Quinn felt 26 again, kissing his bride for the first time. The party continued late into the night, but eventually Quinn and Josie slipped away, walking hand in hand to their hilltop overlooking the ranch. It was December, 40 years almost to the day since Quinn had found Josie in the snow, and the night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead. "You ever wish things had been different?" Quinn asked as they sat on the bench he'd built on the hilltop years ago. "Easier, maybe. We've had our share of hard times." "Never," Josie said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Every struggle, every challenge, it made us stronger, made us appreciate what we had. I wouldn't change a thing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the various houses scattered across their property. Each light represented family, represented love and continuation. "We did good, didn't we?" Josie asked softly. "We did great." "I'm tired, Quinn. Not sad tired, just satisfied tired. Like I've lived a full life and I'm content with it." Quinn understood what she was saying and it terrified him. "Don't talk like that. We've got years left. Maybe, maybe not. But if something were to happen, I want you to know I'm at peace. I got everything I ever dreamed of and more. I got to love you and be loved by you. That's the greatest gift anyone could ask for. You're scaring me. Don't be scared, just be grateful. I am." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Promise me something, anything. If I go first, don't mourn too long. Celebrate instead. Celebrate the life we had, the family we made. And when your time comes, come find me. We'll start a new adventure together. I promise. But I'm counting on you outliving me. I don't want to be here without you. We'll see what happens. God has his own plans." They stayed on the hilltop until the cold drove them back down to their house, but Quinn couldn't shake the feeling of foreboding in his chest. Josie had always been healthy, strong as a horse, but she was 63 now, and the years took their toll on everyone eventually. Winter passed, then spring came with its promise of renewal. Josie was slower that year, tired more easily. She brushed off Quinn's concerns, insisting it was just age catching up with her. But in late April, she collapsed while working in her garden. Quinn was at her side in seconds, gathering her into his arms and shouting for help. The doctor came from town, examined her thoroughly, and gave Quinn the news he'd been dreading. Josie's heart was failing. There was nothing to be done. It was simply her time. How long? Quinn asked, his voice breaking. "Weeks, maybe. A month or 2 if she's lucky. I'm sorry, Quinn. Sometimes the body just decides it's finished." Quinn refused to accept it. He brought in doctors from further away, seeking second opinions, looking for anything that might help. But they all said the same thing. Josie's heart was worn out. All they could do was keep her comfortable. The family gathered. Matthew and Alice came with their children. The twins arrived with their families. Thomas and Ruth moved into the main house to help. The Patterson ranch became a vigil. Everyone waiting, hoping, praying. Josie faced her approaching death with the same grace she'd faced everything else in life. She spent her days saying goodbye to her children and grandchildren, sharing memories, offering advice, making sure everyone knew how loved they were. But most of her time was spent with Quinn, the two of them in their small house, holding each other, saying everything and nothing. "I'm not ready to lose you," Quinn told her one afternoon as they lay together in their bed. Outside, May sunshine poured down on the Montana hills, but Quinn couldn't appreciate its beauty. His whole world was narrowing down to this room, this woman, these final precious moments. "You'll never lose me," Josie replied. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were still bright. "I'll be with you always. In every sunset, every snowfall, every moment of love you witness, I'll be there. It's not the same. No, it's not, but it's something. And Quinn, you have to keep living. Really living, not just going through the motions. Our family needs you. Be there for them." "I will, I promise." "Tell me the story again," Josie asked. "About the day you found me." Quinn had told this story hundreds of times over the years, to their children, their grandchildren, anyone who would listen. But he told it again now, his voice soft in the quiet room. "The blizzard hit 3 hours before sunset," he began, and Josie's eyes drifted closed, a small smile on her lips. "Turning the Montana territory into a white hell. I found a wagon, overturned and abandoned, and then I found you collapsed in the snow. You were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, even half frozen. I knew in that moment my life was about to change." "Wrong address," Josie whispered. "Right destination," Quinn replied, his voice breaking. "I love you, Quinn Patterson, my cowboy, my hero, my everything." "I love you too, Josie, forever and always." She fell asleep then, her breathing shallow but steady. Quinn held her through the night, memorizing the feel of her in his arms, the sound of her breath, the way she fit perfectly against him even after all these years. Josie died 3 days later, on a beautiful May morning with sunshine streaming through the windows, and her entire family gathered around her. She slipped away peacefully, Quinn holding one hand and Matthew holding the other, surrounded by love and the people she'd brought into the world. Quinn felt the moment she left like a physical blow. The light went out of her eyes, the breath stilled in her chest, and suddenly the most important thing in Quinn's world was gone. He lowered his head to her still hand and wept. They buried her on the hilltop overlooking the ranch, just as she'd requested years before. The entire community came out for the funeral. Josie had touched so many lives over the decades, and the outpouring of love and grief was overwhelming. Quinn stood at the graveside, flanked by his children, and tried to accept that this was real. That Josie was really gone. The weeks that followed were the darkest of Quinn's life. He moved through each day mechanically, doing what needed to be done but feeling nothing. The small house they'd shared felt huge and empty without her. He couldn't sleep in their bed, couldn't bear the memory of holding her there as she died. He spent most nights in a chair by the fireplace, staring at nothing. His children worried about him. Matthew tried to get him interested in ranch business. The twins visited constantly, bringing meals and company. Thomas simply sat with him for hours, offering silent support. But none of it helped. Quinn was lost without Josie, adrift in a way he'd never been before. A month after the funeral, Quinn rode up to the hilltop and sat by Josie's grave. He'd brought a blanket, planning to spend the night there, as close to her as he could get. The sun was setting, painting the sky in those shades of gold and pink that Josie had always loved. "I don't know how to do this," Quinn said aloud, talking to the grave marker. "I don't know how to live without you. Everything reminds me of you. Everything hurts. The kids are worried. I'm worried. I promised you I'd keep living, but I don't know if I can." The wind blew across the hilltop, gentle and warm, and for just a moment Quinn could have sworn he smelled Josie's scent, that unique combination of soap and sunshine that had always clung to her. "I miss you so much," Quinn whispered, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Every minute of every day I miss you." He sat there as the stars came out, wrapped in his blanket, and suddenly he could hear Josie's voice in his mind as clearly as if she were sitting beside him. "Celebrate, Quinn. Don't mourn. Celebrate the life we had." Quinn thought about that. 43 years of marriage, 4 children, 14 grandchildren, a successful ranch built from nothing. Countless sunsets watched together, storms weathered together, joys and sorrows shared. They'd had a good life, a great life. How many people could say they'd spent over 4 decades with their true love? How many people got to build something as lasting and beautiful as what he and Josie had created? "All right," Quinn said to the stars, to Josie's spirit, to God, to whoever was listening. "I'll try. I'll celebrate instead of mourn, but you have to help me. I can't do this alone." The wind blew again, and Quinn felt a sense of peace settle over him. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. Acceptance. Josie was gone from this earth, but she'd left so much of herself behind. In their children's faces, in the land they'd built together, in the stories that would be passed down through generations. Quinn stood up, bones creaking with the movement. He was 71 years old, and he felt every year of it, but he was still here, still breathing. Josie had asked him to keep living, to be there for their family. He could do that. For her, he could do that. He made his way back down the hill to his empty house, but instead of sitting in his chair by the fireplace, Quinn went to the bedroom. He lay down on Josie's side of the bed, pressed his face into her pillow, and let himself cry. Really cry, deep sobs that shook his whole body. He cried for what he'd lost, for the unfairness of it, for the loneliness that stretched ahead of him. But when the tears finally subsided, Quinn felt lighter somehow, like he'd released something that had been crushing his chest. He could breathe again. The next morning, Quinn got up and made himself breakfast. Not much, just coffee and eggs, but it was more than he'd managed in weeks. Matthew stopped by and found his father actually dressed and shaved. "Pa, you all right?" "No," Quinn said honestly. "But I'm going to be. Your mother asked me to keep living, to celebrate the life we had instead of mourning what I lost. I'm going to try to do that." Relief flooded Matthew's face. "We've all been so worried." "I know. I'm sorry for putting you through that. I'm still going to have bad days, but I'm going to try to have good ones too." And he did try. Some days were harder than others. Sometimes Quinn would turn to tell Josie something and remember with fresh pain that she wasn't there. Sometimes he'd wake in the night reaching for her. But he forced himself to get up every morning, to eat regularly, to stay involved with the ranch and his family. He spent time with his grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandmother, making sure they never forgot her. He worked alongside his sons, teaching them the last few things he knew about ranching and horses and the land. He sat with his daughters and their families, soaking up their love and company. 2 years after Josie died, Matthew's youngest son, a boy of 16 named Joseph, came to Quinn with a problem. He'd fallen in love with a girl whose family disapproved of him. "What do I do, Grandpa?" the boy asked. "I love her, but her parents say I'm not good enough for her." Quinn looked at his grandson, seeing himself at that age, and smiled. "You fight for her. If you really love her and she loves you back, You don't give up just because it's hard. Love is worth fighting for. Your grandmother and I, we almost didn't end up together. She was supposed to marry someone else, but we fought for each other and we had 43 years of happiness because of it. Really, I never knew that part. So Quinn told the whole story again, from finding Josie in the snowdrift to her saying wrong address and him saying right destination, to their journey to Bannack and the confrontation with Roger Thornton. He told about building the ranch together, raising their children, growing old side by side. "That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard," Joseph said, his eyes shining. "I want that. I want what you and Grandma had. Then fight for it. But make sure she's fighting too. It takes both people wanting it with everything they have." Joseph took the advice to heart. He courted his girl with determination, eventually winning over her parents with his sincerity and work ethic. They married 2 years later, and Quinn sat at the wedding with tears in his eyes, wishing Josie was there to see it. But in a way, she was there. Her legacy lived on in this boy who'd learned about true love from their story, who was brave enough to fight for his own happiness the way Quinn and Josie had fought for theirs. Quinn lived another 5 years after Josie died. They weren't easy years, and he never stopped missing her, but they were good years in their own way. He saw more grandchildren marry, welcomed great-grandchildren into the family. He wrote down his and Josie's story in detail, wanting future generations to know where they came from. On a cold December night, nearly 48 years after he'd pulled Josie from that snowdrift, Quinn went to bed in the small house and simply didn't wake up. Matthew found him the next morning, lying peacefully in bed, a slight smile on his weathered face. They buried him next to Josie on the hilltop, just as he'd wanted. The entire Patterson clan gathered, along with what seemed like half of Montana, to say goodbye to the man who'd built an empire of love and family from a chance rescue in a blizzard. Years passed. The ranch continued to thrive under Matthew's management, then eventually under his children's management. The original cabin, where Quinn had first brought Josie as his bride, was preserved as a historical site, a reminder of the family's humble beginnings. The story of the freezing mail-order bride and the cowboy who saved her became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. On the hilltop, wildflowers grew around the 2 graves every spring, planted long ago by Josie and tended by her descendants. The markers read simply, Quinn Patterson, 1847–1923, beloved husband, father, grandfather Josephine Patterson, 1848–1920, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, but carved beneath both names was the phrase that had defined their life together. Wrong address, right destination. And if you visited that hilltop on a quiet evening when the wind blew just right across the Montana hills, some people swore you could almost hear laughter, and the whispered words of 2 people still in love, still together, still celebrating the beautiful accident of fate that had brought them together one cold December day in 1875. The Patterson family continued to grow and thrive, generation after generation, all stemming from one moment of rescue, one brave decision to choose love over obligation, one cowboy and one freezing mail-order bride who found their right destination in each other's arms.